From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you're with us tonight. Fascinating conversation. We're talking about the impact of climate change in our area. What is it doing here in Tennessee and Kentucky? What are the impacts that we are seeing? And is it too late to do anything about it? Where do we stand with climate change? That's what we're talking about tonight. Of course, we want to hear from you. Happy to have with us as our guest Dodd Galbreath. He's a professor at Lipscomb and director of the Institute of Sustainable Practice.
Yes.
Thank you for being here.
Very glad to be here.
You also, I mean, here in Metro, you're part of the Stormwater Management Committee.
Yes, sir.
And you work on a state board as well.
Yes, sir.
So you're seeing this from all kinds of different angles. Mm-hmm. And so I have two areas I kind of want to go, as I kind of explained. Is it, you see headline after headline, is it too late? It's now or never to limit global warming. You know, time is running out. So where are we? And then, I'm not going to do that first. What are the impacts we're seeing right in our area, right here in Tennessee and Kentucky?
Yeah, the impacts we're seeing right now are typical of climate change that's being accelerated by human behavior. And so natural climate change has a pendulum swing. You have droughts and you have rainy seasons, but when climate change starts occurring, for example, as we emit more and more fossil fuel gases, CO2 and methane into the atmosphere, it creates this heat trapping shield around the planet. And since the sun delivers in 1 hour of every day more energy than the world uses in the entire year, that heat energy and that solar energy has to go back out into space. And so when this gaseous layer gets less porous and less transparent, it traps that extra heat. And that extra heat is driving accelerations of drought and accelerations of rainfall and accelerations of snowstorms in some cases, because the atmosphere is trying to reach a reasonable equilibrium that it was used to before human-caused climate change started.
So what would you point to as examples of weather driven by climate change in the last couple of years, and what can we expect, in your opinion, in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think the flood of 2010 in Nashville was the first kind of wake-up call for the community that was going to be our experience with climate change. You know, in other parts of the world, in drier parts of the world, those areas are getting drier. That's the extreme getting more extreme. In other parts of the world where they get a lot of monsoon rains, those monsoons are getting worse and more intense. But here, in temperate climates like ours, our weather is going to get more erratic, and it's going to be more specific to the type of weather that we routinely experience. So in 2010, we got a big drought. This year, we got a big flood. This year, we got a big drought. Now, another thing that we've noticed too is that in 2010, the rainfall patterns began to fall with a lot greater intensity in a lot shorter period of time. So we actually had two storm events that overlapped together. You might even call them 350-year storm events that behaved like a 700-year storm event because they overlapped with each other. And that's kind of one of the things that happens with climate change, is that previous rainfalls that are more evenly spread all of a sudden get more crunched together. Just this last year in 2021, a lot of people will probably remember the flooding on 7 Mile Creek. That flooding was worse last year than it was during the 2010 storm, because now we're seeing these rainfall events get even tighter and more concentrated as well. So floods and droughts in Nashville are our experience with climate change.
And we've seen it, and we're going to continue to see it.
Yes, sir.
And so then my other question, I mean, again, headline after headline, time is running out. It's now or never to limit global warming. And we've been talking about this for a long time. Where are we? Can we stop this, or where do you think we are?
Well, I guess it depends on your point of view, and it also depends upon what type of scientists you talk to. But, you know, if you're on an island out in the Pacific that's already pretty close to sea level, you know, you don't have much time. You know, there are places that are going to go underwater first. If you live on a coastline, you're already seeing king tides, those big tides that only occur a couple of times a year, coming into areas that the tides didn't used to come to. If you're in Tennessee, you're seeing less regular reminders that something different is going on, like the extreme drought we've had and the extreme rainfall we had in 2010, and some of these extreme rainfalls on top of one river in our community. And so people are reading this differently, and since we're a democracy made up of people with all these different type of perspectives, collaborating with people all over the world who live in different types of locations, it's hard to sort out. But the bottom line is there is a 99.99% consensus that we have to act. We have to move away from putting more heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere, and we have to move rapidly towards that. Some empirical scientists have recently said that we may be too close to the edge just because of the amount of gases that are already up there.
And that would be, I guess, the concern and the question. Can we do things? Can we in the United States, when you do have China and you have other countries all around the world, can we unilaterally in the United States do enough at this apparently late time to make a real difference? Can we stop the floods that may be coming our way in the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think you can look at American history and say that. You know, my family and I were in London. This is an odd example not long ago. And we saw there was a statue of Abraham Lincoln right next to the British Parliament. America has always represented the best of right thinking, the best of moral thinking, the best of fair treatment to their people and to the people of the world. And in many cases, we've gone overseas, like in World War I and World War II, to help recover that standard of peace and that standard of human dignity and governance. And I don't think climate change is going to be any different from us. You know, people of the world have looked to us now for a couple of centuries, and this is our generation's time to do what the Minutemen did. You know, what the suffrage proponents did to give women the right to vote. All of us are going to have to do our part for our time in history, and I think America is in a unique place and a capable place to do that.
So, you've been on this show before.
Yes, sir.
You came on with the head of Bridgestone.
Yes, sir.
Talking about the corporate sort of backing
yes,
for
sir.
making some strides here
yes.
with climate change. You've been in this for a long time. Are you frustrated where we are? Is it hard work? Are you optimistic? I mean, you just laid out an optimistic vision about, and that's good. But are you, when you got into this, you know, did you think you'd be here now, or did you wish you'd be somewhere else now?
I think, well, you know, someone asked Mr. Gore this recently, and it's probably a good example of somebody that's been frustrated and been beat up pretty bad in his home state. And he said, yeah, he thought we would be here a lot quicker, but he's glad that we're here now. You know, I go back to those analogies of, you know, like World War II. How frustrated was Franklin Roosevelt that he had to wait for something like Pearl Harbor, you know, to help the rest of the world stop someone who was going to take over the United States. That was part of Hitler's plan. And how frustrated was Winston Churchill, you know, that they could not move faster on stopping the Germans from invading France and being right there across their channel. So frustration goes with the job, and so does gray hair, and so I'm glad I've lived long enough to appreciate history, and I'm glad I've lived long enough to see people succeed when things get really bad. And so my hope is based upon historical evidence, and my faith dictates that sometimes intervention bigger than we are will step in.
You are chair of Metro's Stormwater Management Committee.
Yes, sir.
Is global warming, how is Metro dealing with global warming? How does the Stormwater Management Committee, how is it impacted and thinking about global warming?
Well, I'll start with Metro because I'm appointed by the mayor, so he's technically my boss. I'm very proud of what John Cooper has done. I mean, you can go all the way back to Phil Bredesen and Bill Purcell in greening the community, making the community more spongy and able to soak up more stormwater so that those flood peaks that rise and that get into people's houses that didn't used to get into people's houses can now be suppressed a little bit by all the parks that we bought, by Shelby Bottoms being allowed to grow up into a spongy forest, by not allowing floodplains to develop in the most frequently flooded areas where water moves fast and could carry things away that could hurt somebody downstream, like a propane tank or part of a house. So we don't allow people to build in the Zone 1 of the floodplains anymore because of Metro leadership. But you can go further than that as well. This administration, sounds like I work for them, doesn't it? But Mayor Cooper launched a partnership with Vanderbilt to build a 100-megawatt solar farm. And then we've had IT companies, information technology companies like Google and Facebook come into the Tennessee Valley and say, if you want our jobs and if you want our multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar investments, you're going to have to give us solar energy to run our data centers. So Google has, I think, a 150-megawatt plant. Facebook has about a 100-megawatt plant. I may be getting those reversed. So you have both metro, academic, and corporate investment, institutions of means, putting their money on the table where it's needed and setting the example. And I think other people are going to follow. And because of that, I think because of all that prior activity, the state has recruited Ford. Ford is going to invest $11.4 billion to build 2 battery plants, one in Tennessee, one in Kentucky, and the world's first carbon neutral manufacturing plant where they're going to build electric trucks. They're going to recycle all the batteries that they make for those trucks. They're going to make all the batteries within the same region. They have other plans as well.
So there's some good things there.
There's enormous momentum going right now that I can't help but think are these huge islands of success that are going to have to create even greater momentum.
As we talk about the impact of climate change in our area, stormwater management, that's the front lines.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, that's really kind of where it starts. You know, droughts are made less intense through greener, spongier landscapes because we store water that's already come to us, which goes into the ground and is basically in a savings account until the stream needs it. So it makes streams not dry up so fast when we've allowed water not to just run off concrete, not just to run off hard roofscapes. But if it's captured and held in the local savings account, it can be used by the stream later on. And then conversely, when we get those human-caused climate change accelerated floods that are much more intense and much more zoned in on a smaller area where water runs off fast, if we protected our native streams, which meander and push the energy of the stream into a compatible geometric pattern, which spills out into a floodplain that stores it where we don't have propane tanks and houses to wash away, and that has trees like Shelby Bottoms growing in it that sponges it up above and below the ground when the water table is not all the way up to the surface. When it's a dry summer, the water table is actually dry so it could absorb more of that flood water. We're going to have smaller floods. And you know, I will say that occasionally, you know, we'll get an applicant for a variance who just needs fair due process, and we'll make compromises. We did that last month, and I didn't like sacrificing a piece of the buffer, but due process and a larger vision for creating a spongier, more renewable, more resilient community can go hand in hand.
I want to take some calls. Let's go to Granger. Hello, Granger.
Hey, how are you guys tonight? Listen, I have a comment, then a question. I'm a Red Cross volunteer, and we keep going into major disasters that are having climate change as a cause, like Paradise, California, a town of 28,000 people that was destroyed with 88 deaths. We have Waverly last year, 17 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, with most of it being in a 3-hour window, okay? We have Kentucky this year. we have this, I don't know if you saw about the heat islands that are going to happen, where we're going to have at normal 125 degree heat in West Tennessee, okay? Why we are just seeing more and more evidence of this. Kentucky this year. How do we get the Republicans who in the Senate, not a one of them stood up for climate change prevention on the bill signed today? I salute you for being an optimist, but I don't know how you do it.
All right. Boy, Granger just laid it all out there.
Well, he did, and I'm glad
so
he
the
shared.
floods, like 1, 2, 3, and then he lays it out there. What do you have to say there?
I'd have to turn to a New York Times op-ed that was written by a local reporter right after the Ford deal was announced by Governor Lee, a Republican. And the title of that article was How to Turn Republicans Green. And it was fundamentally driven by jobs, investment, innovation in your home state. And this article cited Governor Bill Lee and Senator Marsha Blackburn and our other United States senator as well. His name escapes me right now because I knew Lamar.
Hagerty, yeah.
Hagerty, yeah. Bill Hagerty. Apologize for that, Senator Hagerty. But they all were front and center in support, including the Speaker of our House, who's a Republican. We have, I think, a supermajority in both houses of our state General Assembly now, and they were all there supporting it. So I think success is the best motivator. And this is something I noticed too. I worked 1 year for Ned McWhorter, who was a Democrat. Of course, in those days, Democrats and Republicans weren't very different. They were both moderate. Don Sundquist came in. He was a lot further to the right as a congressman until he became governor, and then he moderated quite a bit. Some people would say he almost went left on the income tax. But one thing I noticed with him and with Republican legislators who were working with him for his agenda is that if their voters told them that they wanted something done and it was critical to their reelection bid, or if it was related to the economic advancement or the improvement of the general welfare of the state, ideology frequently went out the window. And I'll give you one example. A Republican legislator in Henderson County had historically been against any kind of control of clear cutting, cutting all the trees in the forest as opposed to more selective cutting and less low impact cutting. And so many of that legislator's constituents called him that he changed his vote. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my source of optimism. I will say I went through a decade or two of depression as I saw things seemingly getting worse. But the thing I tell my students is that, just like Jesus Christ, sometimes you got to go to the garden and pull up your big boy pants and do what you got to do.
Just keep plugging away every day.
Sometimes you got to accept getting beat up for a while and for the longer term plan. And I do think that's partly why they call it faith, because if we knew the outcome, we wouldn't need a higher power. We wouldn't need hope. We'd just be arrogant.
When you were on, I'm going to ask, we're going to go to break in a moment, but when you were on last time, you did have the CEO of Bridgestone.
Yes, sir.
And so you had a bunch of, you were reaching out to CEOs.
Yes, sir.
And that might have been, when I hear you talk about that op-ed, turning Republicans green and if it's beneficial to jobs and the economy and that kind of thing. How did that outreach work? We're reaching out to CEOs and that was a few years ago. Where does that stand? Where are CEOs, do you feel like, on this? And is that having an impact politically?
Yeah, it's CEOs. I brought in the senior editor of greenbiz.com, which is the kind of corporate information source for sustainability for CEOs and for their chief sustainability officers and people in the C-suite that manage corporations, their teams of people. And they all know that sustainability is inevitable. They're having to answer to quarterly stockholder reports. They're having to answer to projections of growth, and they're having to answer to other things. But what's beginning to change them, and this is partly why the federal government changed policy first in how corporations report their earnings and the risks associated with those earnings, so that investors could see climate change as an honest risk, not as a hidden away risk. And the second thing that has helped us is that insurance companies, like the gentleman mentioned about the flooding that occurred in Kentucky and over in Humphreys County, insurance companies know that they can't afford for things to keep getting worse, nor can they afford for communities not to be managed well or planned well, because those assets are insured by them and they don't have to be put in the places they're put in order to avoid bailing them out. And so insurance companies have helped. And
they're powerful. That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
But with hurricanes and all the stuff, insurance companies would probably be hammered.
We all saw this with car safety. You know, that's why insurance companies paid for automobile crash tests. That was not a government-funded crash test program. That was a car insurance industry crash program. So I think we're going to see more of those kind of things. But investors, I think, are the ultimate people who are pushing us most right now, and it's the timelines that are the problem. The investment timeline has always been longer than some of the risks that we have that we're facing now. The risks that we're facing now are require short-term action before short-term realization really kicks in. And investment risks are usually based upon shorter-term reinforcing feedback. You know, something that's encouraging you to put your money on the table for a quick bet. Climate change still looks like it's out in the future to some people, or it's a flood in 2010 still doesn't look sporadic enough or risky enough to really warrant getting rid of the gasoline engine and getting rid of the diesel engine. That's kind of where we're headed. And it's just hard for them to factor in. But to me, and this may be 60-year-old optimism. It's definitely not youthful optimism. But you know, when this country was first confronting the largest military in the world with farmers and small merchants, in colonial villages, they had to be thinking, how do we do something we've never done? And we've done it before.
Wow, the Revolutionary War. You're going back. Very good.
Without the guns and the bullets, hopefully, this time.
We're going to take a break. Michael, others, hold on the line, and that really sets the table for the discussion. If you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.